Good morning.
¿Cómo está?
Bien.
Gracias.
I thought you were going Italian there for a second.
I did too. Yeah, I was, trapped between Mexico and Italy in the Bermuda Triangle.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's a
all
good.
things merge there.
That's a good spot to
Yeah,
be
it's
trapped.
fine. Yeah, why not? If you're gonna be trapped, might as well be in like an epic location. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good morning, everybody. Today is Monday, November the 1st, 2021.
Wow.
Welcome to the future.
Yes. We made it, Reed. We made it.
We did.
I didn't think we were gonna make it this far, really.
Neither did I. Here's to us.
Yeah.
Cheers.
We're here. You're here with us. It's fantastic. Yeah. So, what was your weekend like? You went to Austin, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. Ooh, what? That's
Hey,
wrong
stretch it
button.
out.
Hey, stretching it out.
Yeah. Oh, it's Monday. Oh, ow.
Yeah, so I went down to Austin. It was a pretty cool experience. It was my first time. I've played disc golf now, on and off. I played a little bit for maybe a couple years, but I played real seriously for the last year or so. Is when I started to try
How
and
do
get
you
better.
seriously?
I
play
know,
disc
right? I
golf?
was wondering.
I'm interested in.
I was wondering how that
do you
question
have a
changed.
book in one hand while you're doing
Yes.
it?
Mhm. Yes.
That is the throw.
I wear VR and it analyzes every throw.
Yeah.
Correct this angle by 0.1 degrees.
Yeah.
Uh,
Failure.
Yeah, that's honestly mostly what I hear. Yeah, there's a very significant sound in disc golf. Well, there's two that you hear. One is the nice sound of the disc hitting the chains, which means it's
Yes.
going in. It's very satisfying. And actually, Lincoln has been disc golfing a few times with me, and he recognizes that sound, and he enjoys going out there. So there's sometimes where I'll be watching the pros on YouTube or something like that, and then you'll hear that chain, and he'll turn around, he'll be like, oh, where's that? Where's it? I'm ready. Let's get out of here. But yeah, the other sound, it sounds a little like this, clack, and that's the sound of your disc hitting a tree.
Oh,
So-
slightly deformed disc
Yes,
afterwards.
yes, I'm
Oh.
slightly very aware of that. That sound, I've experienced that many times, and yeah, that was an interesting thing this weekend because all the people I was watching were definitely better than me. They've been playing longer, or actually just been naturally better, or working at it better for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
Maybe they have like a really strong one arm.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
something. Yeah.
What's that? The movie M. Night Shyamalan, like the water. He's one dude who worked out like his only arm. You see that movie?
I have seen that movie. I don't remember that part. Though.
Yeah, it's just like he's just like a random character basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I remember. Do you remember Over the Top? Is an old Sylvester Stallone
haven't seen that
movie
one.
with is about arm wrestling.
Nice.
Yeah, and he's like a trucker. He's a long haul trucker, and so he just in there, and he's got this like pulley system, just like
Working out as he's
working out
going.
as he's driving.
That's hilarious. But yeah, so it's cool to see players who are better than you because you get to learn some stuff, right? You get to see different ways that they do things. They throw discs, maybe different discs than I did. They go for different shots than I would. So it's cool to see how that works. And then it's also cool to see like, hey, like, yeah, these guys are better than me, but I can make those shots. They can. And I can do those things. And that's I've noticed in my experience, at least when it comes to skill-based hobbies, as you get to that intermediate stage, when you compare yourself to people who are, say, in the advanced, or if it's a sport or something, the pro, it's not a matter so much of if you can do the thing. It's about how often you can do the thing and how consistently you can do the thing.
Yeah, that's the kicker. It's one of the things that gets you back. I know that when I was playing golf more, I play now about 2 or 3 times a year. What's fascinating is it takes me about 3 to 6 holes to sort of warm up, and then after I do, I can kind of get back into old form, and that means basically driving it a long ways and making sure they're pretty straight. Not hearing the thwack of hitting that tree. But overall, it's like if you can do it, at the level I'm at, if I can do it about a third of the time, I feel like I could get better. And I know that I can drive the ball, say 300 yards. And
Right.
so I get really thrilled about this. I'm like, I could do this. I could be
Mhm.
pretty good. And then there's days where I can just chip. My approach shots are just perfect. I just have the touch. I'm just nailing it. And I'm like, okay, if I could combine that with the driving game, And then get to the putting, and it's the same thing, right? But I will have days where each one of them is good,
Hmm.
and it's enough to want me to go back out and play. But then again, I've been doing this for enough years to know that they never all sync up for me.
Right.
Like whatever that consistency and really strong game is that some of these guys have, I've just never practiced quite enough to like be able to pull all of them together into the complete package.
Yeah, and that's exactly the same type of thing with disc golf too, and I'm sure it has similarities to other skilled hobbies in sports as well, which is, yes, you may be able to do one individual thing, and maybe you can even do all the individual things, but if you can't do all those individual things well at the same time on the same day,
Yes.
and oh, by the way, one of the cool things about this tournament, and also just well-designed tournaments in general, is either through the course itself, or by having multiple courses, they will subject you to different things that you need to do. You need to
Yeah.
be good at this type of thing. Like for example, so this weekend, a common phrase is woods golf, and then another one, which is one I've heard more about now, is Texas golf. And Texas golf means it's really windy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eh,
No, we had that as well. We had the courses that there were just no trees on. So it was always Texas golf, but there's nothing to block the wind.
right.
And it was just like
Yeah, and
yeah.
so it's just it completely changes the game, and it changes it in golf, regular ball golf. That's what disc golfers call it, ball
Ball
golf.
golf.
Yeah,
This is like American football versus football.
right. It is, and you have just similarly the kind of people who are like, we don't need to call it ball golf. When we say golf, we're meaning disc golf. We know this.
Yeah.
They it's like all right, dude. You can't
Okay.
undo
Yeah.
hundreds of years of trainings or
Yeah,
however old golf is.
it's the same when people say things like bike, and you're like, bicycle or motorcycle, right? And
I'm a
they start,
cyclist.
I'm a cyclist. Ah, wrong cyclist. Like you're not the cool kind. You're the kind wrapped in spandex.
Yeah, I like that. uh,
That could work either way.
yeah, it could. But yeah, it's interesting to see and actually, I don't know if you saw, but there were like wind advisories, and it actually affected a larger area than just where we were down in Austin. I think it was windy up here too.
Yeah, it was windy up here, and we had one day it was really windy. Had a bunch of like limbs come out of some of our trees and stuff like that. So yeah, it was blowing.
Yeah, and it was so it was cool also to see a little bit of how the tournament was run, what they did well, what they didn't do well, and also I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but this was the largest disc golf tournament ever in history. It had 1,300 players, and so one of the things about that was, so you have divisions. So like, okay, men over 40 or something like that, and then there's what's called open, which is basically uh, open is professional. So like basically that's what my friend was in. He's an amateur, but if you get above if you finish in the top 20%, you can accept money, and if you accept money, then you become pro. And so this was like the tournament for amateurs. It was like the championships. So you could, it's where the really cool thing was people came from all over. So there were people just on his card. So this is just a sample size of 369 people.
Yeah.
It was Hawaii, Oklahoma, Texas, Philadelphia, uh, and maybe one or two other. We met somebody from South Dakota. I mean, these people came from all over California. So that was really cool to see people coming from all over. And also, some of them were talking about different things. Like for example, if you live in like Colorado or Utah, where you're playing, where it's very elevated, the disc actually flies differently because the altitude's so high. The air is thinner, which the aerodynamics of the disc change. And so that's the other thing people were saying is like, oh yeah, I just got here yesterday. I'm still learning my disc because again, that's one of the unique things about the sport. One, the discs they fly differently, but two, when you make these drastic changes, and you hear similarly like with baseball, like, oh, it's easier to hit a home run or whatever, but actually they make adjustments for that
Okay.
to make it comparable or whatever. So that's a interesting side
Yeah,
topic,
yeah.
but
It's very nice and bizarre, and like, yeah, you would assume that you would not need to equalize for it because both teams would be hitting, and so you'd both be getting more home runs, and it'd just make it more exciting to watch a game in the Rockies than it would,
yeah.
in LA.
Yeah, well, there's other considerations or whatever, and also the fact that, oh, okay, well, maybe Team A is a good hitter, team, but Team B's not. But
Well,
you know, it just sucks
that's the
for them,
luck of the
right?
draw. Too
Yeah.
bad you have to travel around. But
Yeah, so
yeah,
that is an aspect though of the game design, which was another part that was kind of cool, is because so within his division, they ended up because it was so large, they split it into three different pools, and they were playing across three different courses, and so usually in an average tournament, people are playing the same course on the same day.
mm,
Whereas this case, that was not the case. And so there was this massive windstorm. And the first day we played was on the most open course of them all. And so the best score on the day that we played was like +1 or +2. But then on Saturday when people played it, there someone was like -7 or 7 down
yeah.
through 9. Like it's
Okay,
just
yeah.
like drastically different because there were gusts up to like 50 miles per hour.
Can't control for
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
it's like you
yeah.
can't control for that. And another thing too is if it's 600 feet away, that's one thing if there's no wind, but it's hard to get the distance you need when it's that windy. So it's kind of a it's kind of a grab bag, but that was kind of unfortunate because the people who happened to draw that course on that day were at a significant disadvantage.
Yeah.
So that was fun talking with my buddy a little bit about that and tournament design and things like that. But yeah, and the mix of open with the longer shots, but then there's also within golf, I don't think they bring in artificial out of bounds very often. I think it's just you have the you out of bounds far on one side or the left side, and then you have your hazards, right? Like your
Yeah.
sand traps or your lakes or your rivers.
Yeah, and the sand traps are of course intentional, but there are other hazards that
Yeah,
you have to you get a drop out
and
of.
they're all like natural things you can visually see for the
Yeah,
most part.
for the most part.
And sure, there's like a property line or whatever on the edges that
Yeah.
it's like, oh, if you really shank it, yeah. But disc golf out of bounds can come into play a lot more often, and so especially in there's what's called a mandatory. It's like here is a specific tree or a pole or whatever that you have to throw on the left side of or the right side of,
Oh,
and if
okay.
you don't hit it, then you lose a stroke. And another thing is okay, so they have this big park that's maybe kind of open. Well, then they'll take flags and they'll make the fairway narrow.
Yeah.
And so that was another thing is that narrow. The first day was open, all that wind, and a lot of OB, more OB than we'd seen on many courses.
Mhm.
And so it's like, all right, you got to try and make it within that OB within this wind. So, but it made for a very interesting experience for sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it sounds challenging. I guess while you're talking about this, I had like two thoughts. One is like, how in the world does Austin keep pulling these things in, right? I mean, Austin's great. We talked about it a little bit last time, but one is like, I was thinking of them doing like South by Southwest. And I went to one of the early South by Southwests, and
Before it was cool.
before it was actually already cool. It
Yeah.
was always cool. But yeah, I went to one, and it was a lot of fun, and it was a cool festival. But the funny thing is that was before it started bleeding out into everything else.
Uh-huh.
So now you go down there during South by Southwest, every bar has 5 bands every day that are playing, and they just it's just grown to overtake the whole city.
Right.
And then they have the video festival or something that
Yeah,
the
there's
tech.
Austin City Limits, which combines kind of art, music, technology.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and it's sort of they sort of dovetail together, but it keeps that whole time period like so. There's kind of a techie exhibit thing, then there's your music thing, and then they do some video stuff, and it just they get all of the cool stuff shows up there, and so I was kind of interested in the idea that they drew in the biggest tournament ever for disc golf in Austin. And I was like, well, of course Austin would be trying to do that, right? One of the things that, as an artist, the other side of this that I was thinking about was that when you talked about going pro, actually getting paid for it, then there's something fascinating about being an artist because once you go pro, the idea would be, you're either carried by a gallery or you have some collectors. And those collectors are buying your stuff, and then you're sort of stuck at that price point because you were talking last time about going pro and how once you've gone pro, then you really can't ever go back to being amateur again.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I found too that's a little bit disheartening about the art world is that once I've had somebody pay, let's say, $1,000 for something, well, then I can't turn around and sell the same type of thing to somebody else for $500 because that's undercutting my collector base. So there becomes a point where I can't go backwards without undercutting or burning bridges from what I've done previously. So you can do a different series, you can do this, you can do that, but at a certain point you have to stick with a certain price point, otherwise you're undercutting your collector base. So there is a part about going pro there where you have to just, once you've decided to go pro and make some actual money off of this thing, then that's what you're stuck at. And so this becomes difficult when I do things like I was invited to a charity auction. I probably participate in 3 to 5 of those every year, or I used to. But there's a whole problem there as well where I don't, and we could get deeper into it because you can like the charity, but the idea that they're reliant on artists giving up their work, and then they
Ah,
usually do it at some sort of donated or half price kind of auction thing.
right.
And so it's the perfect opportunity for a collector to get your work at a fraction of the cost. And it's all under the guise of supporting something else. Yet you support a foundation and you support a cause, but you very seldom see any of the money from it. Some of them do it on consignment, but a lot of them don't. But anyway, I'm kind of going off on a wormhole there. Sorry. But yeah, I was kind of curious about this. Just one of the biggest things is like how Austin has done so many great things. They've gathered in all this energy. They've gotten all these cool events, and one of the things that I actually always felt like they were missing was they've on occasion had a good visual arts scene, but it's kind of hit and miss, especially when you compare it to like the action and activity of DFW
Hmm.
or Houston. I think Houston and San Antonio both have, in my opinion, much better visual arts communities and scenes than Austin does. And so I remember kind of thinking to myself, like, you would think that once you had the cool stuff, you'd have all the cool stuff,
Right.
but it's almost like you have to pick and choose.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. Well, for those of you who are just joining us, welcome to the morning show. I'm Reed Garcia,
Ryder Richards.
and today I was just recapping a little bit. I just went to the National Amateur Disc Golf Tour Championship in Austin, Texas this weekend.
What
Yeah.
a mouthful.
Yeah, an NADGT championship in Austin, Texas this weekend. I was the caddy for one of my friends as he was playing in the tournament. And for those of you who aren't aware, the caddy, whether it be in golf or in this case in disc golf, is the person who is helping the player choose what disc to throw, or in the case of golf, which club to use. And then if there's a certain, what's called the line, which is, hey, where do you want that disc to fly through the air? Where are you trying to land it? And thinking about, okay, if I land it here in this shot, then my next shot, I'll have that angle to be able to hit the next shot and things like that. So, which is great for an analytical mind like mine. And, and I see all the different possibilities. I'm like, bloop, 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 this. And on one of the holes, my buddy was like, dude, I'm not on that same level. I can't do that many options right now. Back away,
Yeah.
back away. And I was like, yes.
I just have this, I kind of envision you like having to like plot out the course, having to like run where you think the disc will go.
That would be a fun way to do it. All right, here's one line you could do.
Here's one. Yeah, you have to like, keep your arms out, showing which angle the disc will be floating at.
I like that a lot. I'm gonna have to do that.
When
I'm
it's
gonna
low to the ground, you have to like duck
yeah,
walk.
and then you get back after the 10th one. Your friend's like, "But what about this one?" You're like,
You'd be so fit, man.
I would. I really need to do that. I like that idea a lot. But we also, so we're talking about how the tournament went, talking a little bit about how the city is come to be and some of the cool things they've got, some of the cool things they haven't got yet. And we also talked on Friday, I believe, a little bit about what makes the city the city and what makes it cool, or how development changes, and a little bit about infrastructure, I think, too. But I want to talk a little bit more about what you were talking about, which is things that are hurtful in the long run, but on the surface they look okay, right?
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
can be the example you were using was a charity auction where people are asking artists to donate their work, or at least sell it to them at a lower cost, which then ends up with the collectors getting it at a lower cost than their list value, which effectively devalues the artist's collection of work. And then it's like, oh, but it's under the guise of this charity. This is a good thing, right? And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of examples like this that I've seen where it's like, oh, this is a good thing, and how can you not support this thing? And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like you can get behind it
Yeah.
and be like, grr, how can you not? But it's like, well, no, like take a second to really think about it, and then say like, oh, but you thought about this and this and this. And so this is actually one of the things that popped in our discussion this weekend with disc golf. Is a very common thing is for people to accidentally lose a disc. Okay, so you throw a disc, and the most often type of losing it is you throw it in the lake or the river or something like that. Well, if it's on the edge and the water's kind of clear and you can see it, you can get it out. But there's a lot of times where you can't. You just can't see it, or you can't find it, or maybe you can
Just
even
too
see it.
far out
It's
there.
too far out,
Yeah.
or it's stuck under
Yeah,
something.
I've done this in real golf
Yeah.
too. And then there's this other side of this where you become like a ball pirate, where you're just running around grabbing any ball you
Exactly.
can see because you know you're gonna lose a few more. So then you start going searching everywhere.
Yeah.
So is this where you're going with this?
Oh well, well, kind of, but not exactly. But I'm
Ball
glad you used the word
pirates.
pirate. Yes, especially ball pirates. Brought to you by Helpful for Life.
Garr.
But yeah, that's one of the mild differences between golf and disc golf. Is, as I talked a little bit about, I think on Thursday. A disc is very different from it's even if it's the same model, it can be way different than the other one. Right. And so that makes it each one a lot more unique. And as a disc golfer, especially the better you get, when you have a disc that you know how it flies, you know how, oh, when I pull it this way, it does that type of thing. That's extremely valuable. And so when you lose a disc like that, a lot of people are willing to pay good money for it, or at least say they'll pay good money for it. And so you get into this thing where, hey, let's say I read threw my disc into the lake. I can no longer find it. Well, then the next day, a week later, months later, whatever, well, let's say Joe Schmo, he dives into the lake and he collects 100 discs. Okay. Well, a known thing to do is you write your name and your phone number on the disc. And so one of the discussion points within the community is, if your name and number's on the phone or on the disc, then they should call you and give you the chance to, at the very least, buy back your disc.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense, and why not? On the other hand, this person, yeah, I don't know. That all makes sense, I guess. I'm kind of a little bit like, you lost it. This guy went out and found it. He can do whatever he wants with it. Like, it would be polite of him or nice to him to offer this thing back up, but does he want to go through the hassle of calling and emailing you, and then how much you gonna like? Unless it's $50, I don't know if he needs to actually do that.
Right, which is where it really comes in, the value aspect. Because yeah, I mean, if it's a phone or a wallet or something like that, and the value goes up, in theory, as a quote unquote good person, that should increase your likelihood of taking an effort to return the thing.
Yeah.
Right. But the average disc price is new is no more than $30, and used, I mean, they're as cheap as $1 or $2. So anything from a couple dollars to $30 is about the average price of a disc. And as I mentioned before, like, there are certain discs where people would pay a lot of money for them, but I would say $50 is probably about the top it would be, unless it's just some really special disc. And the more special the disc, the less likely someone's going to be throwing it somewhere where they have a chance of losing it. But yeah, that's the thing. And so I was talking with my buddy about it, and I was like, oh, I get it. But also, I think there's a difference if you're walking down the fairway and you see it and you pick it up. Like, that's one thing. Then, and we do this all the time. It's like, oh, pick it up, text the person or whatever, and be like, hey, I found this. And sometimes they're like, hey, keep it. Sometimes they're like, oh, I'll put it over here on the course, and it's up to them to come pick it up. Or, if you're feeling really nice and generous, like, oh, I'll hold on to it. You can meet up with me later. But
Yeah.
if you're the type of person who's going and intentionally collecting a lot of those discs,
like if you got like scuba gear on and
Yeah.
stuff, and you're out in the lake or the river there, and you're doing that kind of thing, then I feel like this is like a salvage law, right? Like, I think it
exactly.
enters a different realm. And if we want to talk about pirates,
That's exactly where it comes in, because there was this thing on the internet a few months ago where people brought it up, and they're like, that brings in maritime law because it's in the water. And I don't remember the exact definitions, but there were things like, oh, if it's in a river that leads to the ocean or whatever. Like, I don't remember the exact definition.
What is the saltwater content? Of
Yeah.
if it's over 17% saliency, then, whatever, different rules apply.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
might have even varied by state, and it was like, but yeah, it was like if you do that, then you are breaking the law because you are someone else's property, right?
Yeah.
But again, that's where it becomes into value. Like, how many hoops am I going to jump through and do for something that is, if I'm lucky, someone's going to give me, 5, 10, $15. And then also as the owner of a disc, like if I've paid no more than $30 for the disc up front, how much am I going to want to pay again versus getting another disc?
Oh, and we're even talking now if you had to go and take let's pretend you're the guy that gathered all these up and somebody says, "I'll pay you $8 for that disc." And like let's say that what we do is we create a website that's a hub for anybody that is reselling found discs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like, you can go in and you can search by your name or phone number or whatever and see any discs that are yours and you go, "Oh, I really liked that one. I'm going to give this guy $8 for it." Well, by the time he has to wrap it up, take it to the post office, and send it to you, we're at like another $7 for postage.
Yeah, not
Like,
to mention the guy's time.
yeah, and his time, and then he ends up making 10 cents off of this deal.
Right.
And then, but the people in the community are like, they should really do this for us. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I get it, but like once it sort of makes sense, I think economically, whatever that break even point is, then we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I do kind of like the idea you were talking about, though, is if the guy collected all of them and left them at the place he found them, so you leave them at the disc if there was like a concession there or something, and if those are all left there and the guy actually put his own name and number on there and people would actually send that guy money, then it puts that pressure back on the disc owners and the disc finders, and yet that's not happening, right?
Well, but the thing to remember is the incentives, right? Because the guy who's getting them out of the lake, he is on average going to turn around and sell them.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of thinking. Like there has to be incentive structure in place to make it easier for him to do the right thing,
Right.
quote unquote.
Yeah, and that's where also as a player, I enjoy buying used discs, right? And all these discs that people throw in the thing, and guess what? If they bought them for 30 and then someone finds it out of the ocean, like I'm maybe buying it for 10.
Yeah.
So it's like as a player, I also, get the benefits of the used disc. So it gets a little complicated, and I think the people that do it quote unquote best, there are some stores that they'll text the person and they'll say, "Hey, we found a disc that's yours," and they send a picture and they say, "We will hold it for X amount of time, and if you come and get it from us, you will get it at this price, which is what we paid the scuba guy to which is somewhere, it's like $2 to $5 or something like that. And if you don't claim within this time, then we're going to sell it." And that's pretty good. But again, I think that's more effort than they need to do. But some people would hold that as the gold standard. But tell that to the guy who's hanging out by the creek and he pulls out 100 and then he just goes and puts them in his van and sells them to people as they're coming up. Like, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, no, I think the whole thing is kind of fun to think about. It's also, the golf world has the same kind of thing, and I'm sure lots of other spaces do. I'm sure businesses operate on the same principle. Like, oh, you didn't really pay enough attention to this weird little niche down here, and now we're going to captivate this, and now this is either a cost or a benefit to us because you're dropping this stuff. I mean, we can think of even Google as operating on that model, taking our behaviors online, our exhaust data that no one thought was valuable, and they turned it into something valuable. And so there's this kind of idea that maybe all business is built around finding these little realms and developing a fiefdom around them, and and then sort of owning that in some way and making money off of it. The other side of all this stuff is, there's going to be loss, and when I go out to play, I know I'm going to lose some balls.
Right.
I know it's going to cost me money to play this thing, and then to get grumpy about it later is just it feels tacky to me.
Yeah.
it's like, well, somebody should really do this, and this for me.
Grr.
It's like, yeah, I'm like, maybe this isn't the right attitude or behavior to take into this entire endeavor. Like, if you can't control your disc and it goes somewhere that it shouldn't, and well, get better at throwing your discs. Like,
hey, them's fighting words. Them's fighting. But it was the tree, man. It was the wind. Watching people play sports, especially ones that require skilled, repetitive motor movements, it's always interesting to see the reactions that people have, right? Because the reality is it is a skill thing. Sure, there are factors that make it harder, and
Yeah.
there is some element of randomness. For example, like with the wind, did it gust right when you threw?
Right.
And then there's things like, oh, at the tee pad it feels pretty still, but then when it gets out into the open past the trees, then the wind picks up.
Yeah.
So there's things like that are less controllable, but there's
Yeah.
still factors, and at the end of the day, it's still a physics equation.
Yeah, and these are the other sides of all this. You're also choosing to play a hobby or
Yeah.
a sport, whatever. Like go play basketball. It takes really strong gusts to move the basketball, right? And you very seldom lose the basketball.
Yeah.
Most courts are free. Like if you want a free hobby where you're not going to lose your tool, there are sports you can play.
Yeah.
So if you're really going to get worked up about the loss equation, there's other
Oh,
sports.
come on. When's the last time people got upset about something irrational? Or,
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, when did anyone ever make a rational
For
decision?
sure,
Yeah.
for sure. Well,
No, I'm being a little cynical and grumpy there, but I do find the whole thing about hobbies like this is your free time. Go have fun.
right.
Don't get worked up about this stuff. And if you're gonna get worked up about it, like, just take it all with a grain of salt. Keep it in perspective. You were having a lovely day out on a course doing something while
For sure.
other people in different countries are working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. So like, perspective.
Yeah, it is. It's easy to know outside of the moment. Definitely a little harder when you're in it, and that was a thing to see in the tournament, which is for some people, and that's an interesting thing to see how competitively people take it, because realistically with my friend, like we were competing for the middle of the pack. He came into the tournament knowing like we're not gonna finish in the top, we're not gonna make the cut. If we do, like there's a chance, sure, but then when we show up day one with the wins, like there's no chance now.
Yeah.
So then it's both good and bad, because then it's like, okay, well, what's the point? Why are you playing? Why are you striving for? And so some of it's just like competing against yourself, right? I want to do well, and one thing they have is the rating system, which I think I alluded to last week, which you can see how well you shot compared to what your rating is. So ideally you want to shoot at that or better. But then there's also factors like, I've never played these courses before.
Yeah.
There's these conditions I've never had before. So then it's kind of like, hey, I'm okay shooting a little less than that because it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And so it's cool because you can have that competitive nature, and that's one thing that makes the sport really fun to me is you can get really competitive and really into it and take it seriously, like I said earlier, or you can just go out and just have a good time. And oh, by the way, most courses you play on are free. When I say most, I mean like 99% of courses you play on are free. And as I mentioned earlier, you can get used discs for as little as a couple dollars. So
Yeah.
that's
Low
another
entry
thing to
point. Yeah.
another thing to it's a very inexpensive sport to play, and then it's a nice thing to remember when you do lose that disc. I'm like, oh, okay, that was a disc I paid $5 for. I've been playing with it for a year. Okay, that's the price of
okay.
playing the
Yeah.
sport, especially versus golf, where it's like,
Oh, man.
you're lucky if you're paying less than 50 for the round,
Yeah,
much
yeah.
less each one of those balls is a couple dollars, and they get lost a lot
Yeah,
easier than
a
the
lot
disc.
easier. It's a lot harder to find a golf ball.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's also though that's one of the reasons why I think disc golf has a certain following is because it's a little more accessible. It's a little more price friendly. Like buying a good set of golf clubs, woo, that is pricey.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you're stuck in this kind of bourgeois world where you have to have a certain level of disposable income even to engage in playing golf. And so that becomes a kind of a whole different conversation. Sort of circling back to this idea of these hidden costs that you were talking about, like something seems like a good idea up front and then it doesn't really pan out long term or something
Right.
like that. There is that idea that we were talking about going pro in something, and I'm kind of curious how you're feeling about some of that because it's like, I don't, that was the thing with the art world too, is if you consider the art world a hobby,
Hmm.
well, then I shouldn't be complaining about any of this stuff. I should just be happy to be participating in that world. And then if you consider that you're helping charity through your hobby, well, then this is all lovely.
Yeah.
But the minute you start thinking that you're pro at something and you're going to make your living off of it, and that you're putting all of your education and your resources that you've gathered over 20 some odd years of your life into this thing, then to have that money, quote unquote, moved in a, or it's not quote unquote, it's not going back into your pocket. It's going
Right.
into some other cause or some reputational cause. And you're like, but I worked a long time on that. That is my blood, sweat, and tears. That's what my education is in. I should be pro at this. And yet, in this field, being pro means giving. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be receiving. And that's kind of just a weird switch. So I
With
think
art, you mean?
with art, I'm
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about art. It just feels like at times there's a bit of a bait and switch. No, no, no. You're a professional. You should be making a lot of money off of this. Well, I'm not making hardly any money, and yet you're also asking for additional things. Now, if I consider that my hobby and that I am giving back to a community, and part of my hobby is in that way contributing to charity, well, then it's all a blessing and it's all wonderful.
Right.
So
It's just
so much
bonus.
it
Yeah.
is, and so I'm kind of curious on how you straddle these lines over time. I haven't quite figured it out yet. I still contribute to various things that I care about, but I contribute maybe to less of them now than I used to. I also found out that some of these big auctions, they'll do a big one. It'll be something like 1,000 pieces of art, and it's from all over the United States, and they'll bring all this work in, and then it's usually crappily hung. And if it is hung well, then inevitably about half the time your piece comes back somehow damaged or destroyed,
Uh,
because you have all these volunteers and they're moving thousands of pieces of artwork around, and you just don't really get the care and consideration during those kind of things. And so it sort of fries you on wanting to contribute because you keep feeling like you're getting burned.
yeah.
And so this becomes this other thing when these events get too big. And so I'm kind of curious, like, it's great if you can go to the event and do the networking thing, but if you can't, then, I kind of feel like it gets backwards. So one of the things I'm thinking about, even with the disc golf, is you went to this most massive tournament, and you get to say, I went to the most massive tournament. It's like, I went to South by Southwest. It was the most massive music fest. And so what? Like, I would much rather see one band I really love in a very intimate venue than going for that massive. I'm going to see like the best 3 songs of
Right.
37 bands. And so there's something about that kind of culture, I think, that I just want to like throw out there. I'm not necessarily pushing back against it as negative. It's just a preference that I've been building over time, and I just wonder if it's just like an elitist preference that I have, is to not engage in the mass event.
No, I don't think you're alone in that thought process at all. And the reality is it depends on your lens and how you're looking at it, because there's a lot of pros and cons to each one, right? And so, uh, first, I wanted to talk about real quickly the art world and the fact that when you're pro and is giving, and one, I think the art world is frankly one of those areas where systemically has struggled for centuries about that balance between free and paid and professional. And that's one of the things, again, to circle back to what we were talking about earlier, about where it seems like it's a good thing for you to, for example, give your art away or sell it at a price where the average Joe can accept it. But by doing those things, or another one, selling prints at a much lower cost than the original thing to let other people have access to it. But by doing that, you're effectively devaluing the industry. If
Yeah,
that makes
yeah,
sense, right?
no, I mean it's what happens all the time, right? Is everyone's looking for cheaper and cheaper price points, so they come out with and the funny thing about prints is there's high quality prints and low quality prints, but neither one of them are. It's very seldom that those are original artworks. There are things called monoprints, which are, but it's very seldom that that is just the singular medium that somebody uses to make a singular thing. And then all of a sudden we get into multiples and multiplicity and replication, and how much sort of spirit or aura is left in the object after it's been replicated 5,000 times. Like, and what's weird about our culture is because we're a mass consuming culture. Like, so Andy Warhol's take was to actually use pop art, being that these were popular items. When you think about how many times a Campbell's soup can label has actually been printed,
Right.
then he just took that concept and applied it to art, even using the Campbell's soup can, right? And just let's just make a couple thousand of these and stick them up all over the place. And the brilliant part of that was that the repetition of the image over time embeds it into your brain, and its recognizability becomes its power.
Mm-hmm.
And so then at that point you're willing to pay more for it simply because it's recognizable. And we're sitting here talking about like an individual drawing. Say, if you had an original Michelangelo drawing, right, that's got to be worth a fortune. Or if you have a Van Gogh painting.
Or I was thinking of dogs playing poker.
Yeah,
You
right.
know?
That's been turned into a print,
Yeah.
right? But if you had the original painting, right, what is the difference between owning that original and owning a print of it? and then we end up doing a
And the
calculus.
reality is 99.99% of people probably don't care.
No, no,
Yeah.
they probably don't. But yeah, that's the fun thing about most philosophy or interesting kind of equations to get into. If it was to be something people would care about in this realm, right? Like, what would that be? Something that could be sort of, you could buy the original or you could have the one off copy. I immediately start thinking of music, digital items,
I was thinking of food as
food.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some places that will make food and they do it so well that they have a signature item or a signature dish that a ton of people try to replicate, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's that much better at the original in theory. But then of course there's ones where the knockoffs are actually better, right? So that was another spot my head went. And to be honest, as you're throwing all those discussion points out there, I saw about 25 different ways that we could go.
Yeah, sorry about
No,
that. Yeah.
you're good, but so I want to put a pin in that one for today, and I want to ask you a question about. Well, actually, first I wanted us to recap real quick Friday because I don't think we really did that yet. So on Friday, we talked a little bit. We teased daylight savings because we know
Oh
it's
yeah.
coming up
Yeah.
next Sunday. So we wanted to make sure that we talk about that sometime, maybe this week. And then we talked a little bit about what it meant to be a city. Talked a little bit about gentrification, income tax, things like that. We talked about cars. We talked about the TikTok
Yeah.
development
Yeah.
cycle. We played a lovely drawing game where we got to see
That
Reed,
was
the
a great one.
non-artist, draw things and Ryder explain them auditorily to people. So they're fun to watch and see how the drawing looks like. If you haven't yet, it's on YouTube.
It was a furry baseball cap.
Yes. Then you can also just watch, just listen without watching to see if you can. I would invite you to do that first. Listen only with audio, and then look at the drawing afterwards. It makes it fun. Um, yeah, and then the challenge was to talk to look at a sunrise or a sunset.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I saw multiple of both of those, and I also looked at the stars some as well.
Oh.
So that was nice. Where we were was dark enough to where you could see stars. It was, I'm sure there's a grading, and there's probably names for it, but it was like you could see constellations, you could see the stars, but you don't see the Milky Way. So it wasn't
Right.
like that dark. But it was pretty cool. So that's what our challenge was on Friday. Look at a sunrise or a sunset. If you haven't done that yet, get that in this week because again, daylight savings time is coming on Sunday, and that's gonna move everything back an hour, which may make it easier or harder for you. But if you
Yeah.
work a typical 9 to 5, it might make it a little harder for you to see sunrise and sunset. So
And
go ahead.
oh yeah, one of the things about that, we were talking a lot about how your body has a clock in it. Your body
Yes.
is a clock.
Yes, the circadian rhythm.
Yeah, yeah. And so one of the things as well as those sunrises and sunsets, that actually generates dopamine production, while the middle of the day actually decreases dopamine. So that's your chemical in you that has motivation and drive, right? It's not necessarily happiness or sadness, but motivation and drive can be increased in the mornings by staring at the sun. So it's kind of like, oh, awesome. Let's
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, please do that.
Yeah.
And I will mention that it's funny because naturally we were talking with some friends this weekend and then circadian rhythm came up and it's like, that's funny. We were just talking about that. But yeah, and it was coming up with these guys. They're like, oh, I haven't woken up with an alarm in years just because they had programmed. And that's honestly, now that I've had this show going for a while,
Yeah.
I've started to wake up now just naturally before the alarm, which has been kind of cool. Not many times in my life has that happened. But this brings me to the main point that I wanted to discuss with you, which was, how do you keep going, Ryder? And when you get in the tough, as a reminder, Ryder's got a shop that he's building, and he just had to move out of his office. And so this weekend he was moving out of his office while he's
Yeah.
building his new one, which literally means building the ceilings and the
Yeah.
walls. And he shows up today on the front porch and he's like a zombie, like, I'm alive, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a bit wiped. I've been sort of, as I think we've alluded to in previous episodes, I tend to burn the candle at both ends on occasion. I have time periods where I've really kind of focus only on one job, but most of the time it's 2 to 3 jobs, and sometimes 4. And this one has been a doozy because while also trying to keep my own podcast going and doing Helpful for Life, this podcast in the morning, I have my day job. That's still a 40-hour a week gig, and then I've been doing the shop. And When I start building out the shop, then that's a different kind of labor than I'm accustomed to. So
Yeah.
the thing that I'm interested in there is taking on these projects that actually just like force you into a different kind of labor and a different kind of being and a way to sort of deal with the world in a different way. And they don't seem pleasant. Like it's not like you go, yeah, I'm going to take this on and it's just going to be nothing but fun.
Right.
Like, I don't think anyone that's framing out a space ever says that, or anyone doing sheetrock and taping and bedding and mudding. Like, no one says, you know what, this will be a lot of fun to like insulate an attic. Like, no one wants to do those things. But I think there's something about it that is sort of meaningful and profound, and it can kind of change your way of thinking and relating to the world. So one every now and then I take on these projects and I know I can do them, so I just force myself to do them. What that does to my willpower and good mood over a period of time is it slowly all diminishes because I'm just pushing.
Yeah. Do you notice, or either yourself or from maybe your wife telling you, as you
Yeah.
do this more, you become grumpier, more irritable, things like that?
Yeah, we've had the kind of conversations that and the way I tend to frame it is this will be a rough month. This will be a long 3 weeks or whatever that because I have this, and this going on, and this is just going to be a difficult time period. The idea though is that the benefits long term will
Will be worth
outweigh the
it.
short term.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're doing by doing all this is we're actually saving quite a bit of money every month. At least one huge car payment, probably a little more than that, every month will be saved just by this move. So there's some money that goes in up front. There's a lot of labor that goes in up front. So a part of me is always just trying to look at that. What is the long term benefit here? What
Right.
is the long term cost? And long term, it's not so bad. If you can go, you know what, in 3 years, I will be very happy that I did this the right way now. That's a great kind of mindset to keep your brain going on.
Sure.
Now, what happens on the opposite side quite often is that you're in the midst of it and you're just like, I'm just tired and I don't care and I just need to get this done.
Yeah.
And so that instant gratification versus a long term, those are hard to manage.
Yeah. To use the parallel, you're when you lose your disc, you're yelling about it, but even though you
Yeah,
recognize
yeah,
rationally it's not that bad. But yeah, in this case, the nice thing is what you're working on is an investment in the future and an investment in yourself. Now, the trap to avoid falling into, which is one that obviously I'm sure is back of mind for you, is doing this all the time, right?
yeah,
And that's one of the things that whenever we started looking at, okay, we're going to design what our ideal life looks like. It's like, okay, we're okay putting in the time. We're okay putting in the work. We're okay having those peak times where you're burning the candle at both ends. You're working long days. You're working overtime or whatnot. But for us, we were like, we don't want that to be the norm, right? We want that to be, okay, maybe before a deadline, maybe before a big push, something like that. But making sure that's not the norm forever, right? And so that's kind of leads to what I think, and let me know what your thoughts are
yeah.
for the challenge for today. I think there's two ways you can take it, depending on maybe who you are and what's going on in your life. The first one is, what is something that you could work on, you could do, you could put a little bit of extra effort, a little bit of extra time,
Mm,
maybe a little bit extra money into, and do some short-term investment of time, energy, etc.,
yeah.
to give yourself a bigger, better payoff in the long term. And that could be in a lot of things. That could be some improvement to your house. That could be some skill that you're working on or some class you're investing in. You can interpret that however you'd like, but figure out what is something I could do where I'm going to put in a bunch of time right now. Or you can plan it out in the future where this is going to be a short amount of time where life is kind of going to be hard and difficult, but I'm going to make that sacrifice because I know it's worth it in the long run. And the flip side of that challenge is, especially if you're one of the person who's always burning candles from the both ends,
Yeah.
what is some way that you can intentionally force yourself to break that cycle, or to at least turn it into kind of a TikTok cycle? Like, okay, I'm spend a couple weeks or a month where I'm really grinding, but then I have a few weeks or a couple months or whatever time frame that is where I'm not doing so much, and I am giving myself more time for leisure. Because guess what? It's very easy, especially with the American mindset. It's in our culture. We are biased to have lack. We feel like we always should be doing more. We feel
Yeah.
like there's not enough time, right? But guess what? When you give yourself that time and space, your brain works differently. The things that you do naturally and the things that you want to do, they change. You give yourself the time and space to think and reflect. I'm not exaggerating. It can literally change your life and
Yeah.
completely change the way you do and the way you do things. The trap to fall into when you're always busy is you're not necessarily giving yourself the time and space to get your head up, look around, see what's going on, and see like, hey, is that grind still worth it? Like I'm doing
Yeah.
this grind, and is that the grind that I need to be doing? And it's easy to tell yourself stories, by the way, too. Like for example, oh, I'm in the grind. I'm working this job I don't really like, but if I hit this mark in 5 years or 2 years, then I'll get a better pension or I'll get this
Yeah. Right.
bonus or whatever. And guess what? All these little incentives that they have out there, that's one of the reasons is because it's to keep you in that grind and to prevent you from saying, hey, if you took your head up and look around, like there are all these other things you could be doing. By the way, they pay you more, you would work less, and you'd have this. And that's not always the case, right?
Right.
But
Right. No.
that's kind of the idea. What are your thoughts on
Oh
that?
man, I'm on board with you all the way there, and we could keep going even further with a lot of this, right? Because yeah, there's a lot of traps out there, and there's books that are written about these traps, right? There's oh man, when it gets into the sort of psychology of it, it becomes and the behavioral sort of the behavioral cycles of humans in general, then it gets really kind of strange to start looking at all the little things that we do that are for safety or security, or we get stuck in that grind and then we become familiar with the grind and we actually become the grind. We become the routine. We become stuck in that rut. So, yeah, how do you block off a little bit of time for yourself to actually look up, pop your head up, look around, make sure everything is worthwhile? Maybe do a kind of a debrief, right? Where you sit down with somebody or a couple of somebodies and say, this is the direction my life is going. What do we think? I would like advice. I would like for you to be bought in on my life with me. Like, where is this going? Where should this go? Those are all kind of ways to get yourself out of some of these cycles. But on a daily basis, what I try to do is go for something like a 25-minute walk where I am unplugged, completely on, no phone, no audio, anything else. And
Which is
there's
awesome. That's very good.
yeah, I haven't been making it as much this week. Meditation, daily reading, and daily walking have all been harder to do in the last like week and a half because I've gotten so busy. And there are things that are time bound that I do need to be doing. And so those time bound things, I know that there's an end to them. And
Hmm.
basically, it will be this week. They will have to end. And so I'm just like, you know what? What is your routine for? Your routine is to help you during certain times, but there's the creativity and there's this amazingness and all this kind of stuff. And then there's times where you just have to grind
Right.
and you just have to execute. And so even in the art world, everyone talks about it as be like, oh, you're so open and free to the world and creativity and blah. Well, sometimes it's just execution. The creativity comes early on. You have the idea, and then it's just weeks or months of just executing on that idea to get it to fruition so that that thing can come alive in the world. So I think that there are phases here, and knowing that you have these phases is kind of interesting, but you also probably need to plan in the downtime.
Yep.
So for me, once I get the office finished, I'll probably set up the little air conditioner unit that I got, and then I'm gonna have to like call it quits until basically January just to give myself time to recharge.
Yeah. That's
So
great.
I'm having to schedule out my own like mental health and physical health because right now my body is a little bit broken.
Yeah. And I'll point out, like, if you right now you're listening is like, oh, Reed, I don't need to be doing these things. I've worked every day in my life. Grumble, grumble, grumble.
Because that's what people do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Just like, well, the minute you say, you know what, maybe you should rethink your life. So many people, it's like, "Meh, meh, meh, meh," and you're just like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I know it might take an extra 3 seconds, but I do think that there is a very inbuilt fear of taking a hard look.
Yes. And that's one of the things that, uh, by the way, to step back for a second, when we were talking about needing to take a look, trying to figure out where you want to go, what should I do next? Yes, we totally encourage you to do that with your friends, your family, and people in your life, but also that's the purpose of this company. We are
Yeah.
here to help you guys. So get into the chat, send us a contact, use our contact form on our website, helpfulforlife.com/contact us, or click the contact us button, and let us know what it is you're trying to work through. And guess what? We can discuss it with you, or we can talk about it on the show here, and we can use it as a tool to help other people who are going through the same kind of things. But yeah, I think the important thing to point out is it should be a cycle, right? And if you're stuck in that phase of your cycle where it's just do, head down all the time, then that's probably not great. And if you are someone who's feeling resistance when I say just take a second and think about it, and maybe give yourself even a freaking 5-minute walk with no phone or anything, like if you are hesitant and you are like, I don't need to do that, guess what? You need to do that more than anybody else.
Yeah, yeah, it's so weird how that works, right? Is yeah, the people that are already doing it are all going, yes, that was amazing. That changed my life by walking, by being out in nature. And they're all saying, hooray, hooray. And then there's a lot of people who are like, nope, this is just the way I live and this is what I
This is
do.
me. I'm never going to
And,
change.
yeah, and that's kind of, we all get it.
Yeah.
It's also this kind of thing where it's just recognizing that that trap is easy to fall into. And yeah, I do think that there was a time period where that kind of like dedication and loyalty and single-mindedness were it was sort of a generation. And
Yeah.
I just don't know if our world necessarily operates that way anymore. I do know certain people in it still do. But there's also so much new information about how humans perform the best and are the best and can be the best. And when we start digging into that kind of information, it's kind of like a lot of these habits that Reed and I talk about walking, seeing nature, meditating, any of these things they're coming out of cognitive behavioral science.
Right. The scientific proof that these are good things. And, when you said that, it was making me think of a friend who was telling me their grandparents were born during the Depression, right? And like how that completely changes the entire way they view the world and how they view money and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's like, oh, they've been working all day, every day for years, and now they're 80, whatever, and they're still, grinding at it or
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah. Well, and that's fine. We're not trying to we're not trying to say that that's necessarily wrong. It probably worked very well for them. But there's also other sides to life that maybe they didn't get to participate in as much, and those might be open to you.
And that's the beauty of living in 2021, and that's
Yes.
the privilege that we have by civilization developing the way it has, right?
Yeah.
We can sit here on a couch talking through a microphone to anyone across the entire world,
Yeah.
right? And we can do work from a computer anywhere in the world, right? And so these are some of the things that now exist. There are additional options for you. So yeah, part of what this show and the company is purpose is to help you discover more of those things, right? So I wanted to jump to the chat real quick because we have Danielle saying that, oh, that would be a wonderful name for a coffee shop. Become the grind.
Become the grind.
Become the grind.
I have a bumper sticker on my truck that it's about time to clean the bumper stickers off. But I have one that says "Coffee and Destroy," which I really enjoy. But yeah, that was Clutch Coffee in Japan.
Nice.
But yeah, become the grind.
I like it.
So Danielle, Suanna and I have a vinyl cutter, so we can make any kind of stickers you want. If we need to make a fake coffee shop and name it Become the Grind, we can do it.
um, Brings up this one little comedy show that I saw, which was called what's it? Nathan? Oh, he's just like a satirist. Like he has the like deadpan humor. His name's Nathan. I don't remember his last name, but he does these things where it's just so like silly and out there, but he does it all with a straight face. And it's so for example, the one that popped in my head, this is a series. So the episode was he made a fake Starbucks, and he literally like had a building and put up a logo and called it like fake Starbucks or something like that. And he went to a lawyer and he was like, all right, how do I do this without getting sued or breaking laws or whatever? And he's like, all right, it's as long as you have it as a parody, and it's very obviously a parody, And if you've established yourself as a parody artist,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
so
that's
he's
great.
like, okay, I got that. And then so he went and did like these things. I won't spoil it, but he did these things to establish himself as a parody. And then there's some really funny stuff that he talks about with the lawyer. It's the classic case of a lawyer doing something good and probably being willing to be on this TV, and then he ends up like making some kind of foible, and it's like all within the show, and it's like, oh well, this is the contract. So it's amusing. It's so yeah, look up fake Starbucks, and I think the guy's name is Nathan something, but that's an amusing little episode to watch.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, that sounds like a lot of fun. There was an art group down in Austin. We were speaking of visual arts earlier, and they were called OK Mountain, and they made their own convenience store, and everything in it was art products. And so like the sodas and everything were,
Oh
and
nice.
and so this was hosted these art fairs, right, where you have thousands of people running through just trying to buy as much art as possible. And they just said they're basically like, well, the one thing missing here is like a convenience store for people. So they made one where every object in it was art, and it was like Twizzlers, but it was their own version of Twizzlers,
uh
and so you couldn't actually eat
it's
anything.
cool
It
but
was,
annoying at the same
yeah,
time.
right. It was, jar of pickles,
Right.
and, but it would just be them putting a bunch of like socks in there or something. It was very bizarre, but it
Nice.
was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. Which brings me to one of the things that you brought up that I'd like to talk about, which is, how does a city develop the cool things or have these things that are enjoyable, whether it's arts, music, businesses, whatever. And so that's something I want to talk about on a future day. We'll put a pin in it for now, but that is, to make it sound cheesy, being the change you want to be. And if you want to see, like, if you want your city to have a certain aspect, you'd be surprised by how it only takes a couple of people for that type of thing to happen. And to tie it into disc golf, my buddy was like, one of our courses we played was an hour and 15 minutes north of Austin, and it's like, why are we coming here, like, for this course? Like, we have this whole city here. Well, it's like, and we went to this city. It was a small city. There's not a lot going on. It's like, why is there this good of a course here? And I'm like, well, it really only takes a couple of people to create something that is good enough where people will come from elsewhere to participate in it.
Mm.
And so I want to talk a little bit more about that on another day.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like a fun topic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. But for today, that is it. It is Monday, November 1st. Happy Monday, everybody.
Happy
Yes,
Monday.
go kill it today. And your challenge was to pay attention to, if you're someone who is always doing,
Yeah.
schedule in that time to not do, to think, reflect, and then maybe change how you're doing things. And if you're someone who's maybe could benefit from doing something short term, where I'm going to do it, I'm going to stress myself out a little bit, but it's going to be working on this one thing in the short term that's going to be great for the long term. That's kind of the challenge. Take either side of that, which resonates with you, and make it happen. So with that, have a great one.